Welcome to Refuting Rationality, the show where I refute the YouTube atheist Rationality Rules. In today's episode, I have another double. The second one is actually the last of his 3-minute videos that he did at the time of this recording, but since he didn't have any other 3-minute videos I could have done, or that I wanted to do, I combined this one with his video titled The Argument from Miracles, which I was able to cut out a lot, due to it not being completely inaccurate. And we begin with the argument from miracles.
So let's begin, as we always do, by clearly presenting the argument. Simply stated, the argument from miracles asserts that the occurrence of miracles prove that a very specific God exists, normally being a variation of the Abrahamic God. And it defines a miracle as an extraordinary and welcome event that is not explicable by natural or scientific laws, and is therefore attributed to divine agency. Or, in the eternal words of David Hume, a miracle is a violation of the laws of nature, and as such it's necessarily supernatural. It's an intentional, supernatural intervention. A few examples of asserted miracles include Jesus Christ rising from the dead, Muhammad splitting the moon, Moses parting the Red Sea, Zeus defeating Kronos, Thor defeating the frost giants, statues of Ganesha drinking milk offerings, and of course, the classic almighty creator of the universe imprinting himself on some dude's toast. Because, reasons. Now there are only really two ways to refute a miraculous claim. The first is to address the specific miracle being asserted, and the second is to address miracles as a whole. The problem with the first approach is that even if you're able to debunk the assertion and convince the proponent that they are mistaken, the mode of thought that caused them to believe in the miracle in the first place remains, and so they'll almost certainly ram another miraculous claim down your throat within seconds, normally primed with the words, okay, well what about this miracle? But if, on the other hand, you're able to successfully convince the proponent that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that no amount of anecdotal testimonies would ever be enough to prove that a certain miracle actually happened, you would have essentially chopped the tree at its roots, and in doing so, likely purged their religious beliefs entirely, let alone their beliefs in miracles. And that, my friends, is actually the problem. Miracles are to religion what pens are to paper. They are predicated on one another, and so the chances of you convincing a proponent that as of yet, not a single suspension of the laws of nature has been scientifically documented is remarkably slim.
Well, that was kind of a long start, but let's start at the beginning. At first, it would seem he's making mountains out of molehills again, saying that the argument goes for a very specific God. However, with the case for miracles, that would actually be true. At least in the case of documented miracles, such as Jesus rising from the dead. And for non-documented miracles, which would be events that people call miracles for one reason or another, but are not recorded in any religious books. His first definition of miracle is fine. That one basically agrees with my dictionary. However, that definition does not agree with a miracle is a violation of the laws of nature. Miracles are, let's go back to that definition, an extraordinary event that is not explicable by natural or scientific laws. Just because natural and scientific laws can't explain them doesn't mean that they violate them. For instance, the 10 Plagues of Egypt. There was a bad movie once called, I think it was called The Reaping, where some lady tried to give natural reasons for the progression of the 10 plagues. Of course, they had to cut a few corners to make that work. Most notably the timing. The plagues started when Moses commanded them to, and they stopped when he commanded them to. Just the timing alone would be a miracle, but it does not violate any natural or scientific laws. Next, how would Zeus killing Kronos and Thor killing a frost giant count as miracles by that definition? What natural law was Zeus violating when he killed Kronos? What natural law would Thor have been violating to kill the frost giant? And next he has this same old line of extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, which is such a red herring. Any evidence of an extraordinary claim would, by definition, be extraordinary evidence. You might as well just say, claims require evidence, and move on. And lastly, this last line, as of yet not a single suspension of the laws of nature has been scientifically documented. Well, that depends on what you mean by scientifically documented, but we certainly have some that have been historically documented, such as the resurrection of Jesus.
The first flaw to reveal, in my not so humble opinion, is that the vast majority of miracles wouldn't prove the existence of God even if they were indeed true. Or in other words, they don't support theism. For example, even if it were unimpeachably true that a man called Jesus resurrected, this would not, in the slightest, prove that the universe had a creator. Nor would it prove that Jesus turned water into wine, that he healed the blind, that he walked on water, or that he was born of a virgin.
Yes, it would. Mr. Rationality really isn't thinking this one through. First of all, it is unimpeachable that Jesus rose from the dead. It's very well documented. But secondly, if you accept the fact that Jesus rose from the dead unimpeachably, then why would you arbitrarily dismiss all the other claims? I will grant you that you might have to already accept Jesus as God before you accept that he was born of a virgin, since only Mary and Joseph would have testified to that as first-hand witnesses. But the same witnesses who wrote of his resurrection wrote of him walking on water and turning water into wine. And of course there's the fact that Jesus didn't just rise from the dead, he also predicted his death and resurrection. And that is not the only claim Jesus made. He also claimed to be God. And to quote someone else, possibly Frank Turek, well, paraphrase perhaps, if you predict your own death and resurrection, and it happens, I will listen very closely to what you have to say. Not that I'm not listening closely now, but I'd take you more seriously.
And this brings us comfortably to a necessary question that is extremely effective at exposing a third fallacy that ravishes miraculous assertions. This question is, how exactly can we distinguish a miracle from an unlikely natural occurrence that we are yet to comprehend?
Now that is a good question, although if he's not careful, he's awfully close to appealing to ignorance by saying, we don't know, therefore not a miracle. But nevertheless, it is a good question. Let's take one we should all be able to agree is a miracle, the resurrection of Jesus. Normal human beings cannot bring themselves back from the dead. Jesus did. Now, you might say I don't comprehend how he came back, but if you did that, then there would actually be some subtext there. You would actually be saying I don't comprehend how he could naturally come back from the dead. But the reason for that is that I do comprehend that it's impossible for him to naturally come back from the dead. Furthermore, as described earlier with the 10 plagues example, miracles can still be miracles within the laws of nature. What makes it a miracle is the unique and inexplicable nature of it. So how exactly can we distinguish a miracle from an unlikely natural occurrence? How about possibly by defining a miracle as an unlikely natural occurrence? Perhaps not as a primary definition. However, I do think it fits well as a secondary definition. All that being said, are miracles a good argument for God? The answer is not to an atheist, because the atheist will assume his worldview and dismiss everything as not a miracle and just currently not explained. Meanwhile, someone else might overuse the term miracle and basically apply it to everything, which devalues the more supernatural miracles. So, if you're debating somebody, unless you both agree on whether or not an event is a miracle, not arguing whether or not the event actually happened, but whether the event was a miracle or not, then that is not a rabbit trail you want to follow.
On May 5th, 2007, in a debate aired on Nightline, Cameron presented his now infamous crocoduck in the attempt to mock and denounce evolution, and it backfired tremendously.
Science has never found a genuine transitional form that is one kind of animal crossing over into another kind, either living or in the fossil record. And there's supposed to be billions of them. Now, what I'm about to show you does not exist. This is what evolutionists have been searching for hundreds of years. All right, and if you find one of these, you could become rich and famous. So here's some transitional forms. This is called the crocodile. Can you see this?
God,
Crocodile and a duck.
Oh boy, where to start? How about with Brian Sapient's immediate and hilarious response?
Can you see this?
God,
To get straight to it, the crocoduck is a grave misapprehension of what a transitional form is, and it spectacularly exposes Cameron's abysmal ignorance of the subject. Or worse still, it exposes him as a contrived and deceitful liar. A transitional form is not a random combination of two organisms. That's a chimera. Rather, it's an organism that has characteristics of both its ancestors and descendants. To illustrate this, consider the following two examples. A species of Amniota is considered to be the most recent ancestor between snakes and humans, but it would be incorrect to call it a transitional form between the two, because one didn't transition from the other. They are related, but they are not closely related, just as crocodiles and ducks are related, but they are not closely related. On the other hand, Tetrapodophis is considered to be the most recent ancestor between snakes and lizards, and it would be correct to call it a transitional form between the two, because one did transition from the other. To the untrained eye, it might look like an elongated lizard, but unlike lizards, and just like snakes, it has a short tail, broad belly scales, a skull with a short snout and long brain case, curved jaws, and sharp-hooked teeth. It is, if you will, the snizzard.
I find it hilarious that the example he gives of a transitional fossil is a snake with legs. Where have I heard about a snake with legs before? Oh yes, Genesis. Anyway, a snake with legs is not a transitional fossil. For all you know, that could just be an extinct snake that happened to have legs. Then there's those word games he's playing, trying to make transitional fossils sound different than chimera. But if you were to see a living transitional fossil, it should look like a chimera of some sort. And what about that guy's mumbling response was supposed to be funny? The first half was just a reaction and the second half was completely unintelligible. And of course the biggest thing I have to mention is the begging the question. On what grounds does he assume that that fossil is of any relation to that snake? Obviously, I don't mean that specific snake, but you know. Even if he were somehow able to prove that all snakes descended from that legged snake, he would actually be confirming the Bible, because the Bible states that snakes used to have legs, or at least it implies it. I think he would have tried to spend more time trying to somehow show that crocodiles and ducks would not have had some transition in between them at some point. Instead, he moves on to snakes. I guess Wikipedia didn't have anything on alligators and ducks and their assumed heritage.
Moving on, and to get to the crux of this rebuttal, due to Cameron insisting that the crocoduck is exactly
What evolutionists have been searching for hundreds of years.
he is misrepresenting evolution in order to make it easier to attack, which is pretty much exactly the definition of the straw man fallacy. It's the equivalent of me asserting that Cameron believes that there is an omnipotent, bearded Caucasian man within the clouds, and that if you find him,
You could become rich and famous.
This one's not entirely wrong, though given the way atheists do talk about Christian beliefs, and I am including Mr. Rationality in that, I do not have any sympathy for Kirk Cameron making fun of your beliefs. Maybe it is technically a straw man, but it is a pretty good representation. Now, before I end this video, I would like to ask a question. Why is it that I never hear evolutionists try and claim that the platypus is a living transitional fossil? Bill of a duck, tail of a beaver, a mammal that lays eggs? You would think evolutionists would be claiming it as living proof of evolution. Yet I never hear it happen. So if anyone in the comments knows an answer to this, feel free to let me know.